Mitzi. Welcome to Dying to Live.
Well, hello, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today and um, give people a little bit of an insider view into thanatology and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's just jump in. When I first met you, I was really delighted at your morbid humor because I think that's really important for anyone that works at the end of life and also just being able to share, share with the other weird kids at the table in the death conscious place. So thanks for being one of those cool kids.
Right back at you. You know, when we can find people that appreciate our morbid humor, we have to just stick with them because, yeah, it's a rare bunch in kind of a way. The more I do it, the more I realize it's not that rare. It's just kind of taboo. And
Mm,
so more people come out of the woodwork and they're like, I kind of like that morbid humor. So,
yeah.
let's
And
do
then
it.
it gives other people permission to lean into that as well, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Excellent.
I think first and foremost, I want to ask what the F is a thanatologist.
What the earth as a thanatologist? So it is somebody who studies death and dying. We are, it's a kind of a loose term in so many ways. So anyone can be a thanatologist, anyone that studies death and dying. There's
So,
no real thing.
so wait, am I a thanatologist?
If you want to call yourself that, you probably could.
Gonna add that to the LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yes.
So there is a governing body for thanatology, and that's the Association of Death Education and Counselors, ADEC. And that's it's kind of blending death and dying and counseling. And so, but you don't necessarily have to be a counselor, but you have to have a lot of experience to get that designation to be certified in thanatology,
Mm.
or become a fellow in thanatology. And there's a few degree programs. There's some master's degrees, there's some PhDs in thanatology, but it's rare to find it, and it's far in between. So I don't know, it's kind of that weird mix.
Mhm.
If you're a thanatologist or not, Kristen, we don't know. Yeah, put
We
it on
don't
your
know.
LinkedIn.
Remains to be seen. I might just add it to the old resume anyway, just so
you
somebody
know
will ask me about it.
and that's the thing, right? Because nobody knows what it is, so it doesn't really matter, right? Because everyone's like, what is that?
And you are also a therapist.
Yes, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Washington.
And that is a real thing, as I understand it. So good for you. Um, but and you are, correct me if I'm wrong, I might get this wrong, but you are right now taking certain steps to actually achieve that fellow title, right, for thanatology. That's very
Yes. So
cool.
after, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's I mean, I don't know what it's for. I'll be completely honest. A lot of people that are in my field are grief therapists, like me, and they'll ask me. I do quite a bit of consulting actually with grief therapists that are like, "Is it worth it to do this test?" Because I will say, the test from ADEC it's it's a good solid test. It's a 3 hour. You really need to study for that puppy, and they only do it once a year. And if you lose your internet connection, you're out. Like they let like right away. And it was real, like in a good way. I appreciate it as well, but it was something that you have to do. You have to have a lot of CEs, a lot of experience, letters of recommendation. And so you get that part, and then years in, if you create a body of work that helps the public, and you teach and you do all these things, right? Death education, then you can apply for this fellowship. Yeah. So I'm working on that fellowship part. I think it was eligible last year, but it was just, last year was rough. And so I was like, not this year. So now I'm doing it. Yeah.
That's amazing. And one of the, so many places I want to take us right now, but one of the ways that I know you in the professional sense is your passion around wanting to make sure that the role of end of life doulas kind of comes to consciousness and sees the light of day as a support for people. Because right now, where, just for anyone who's not familiar, where the role is kind of at is it's very much, I guess, where birth dueling might have been like in terms of mainstream consciousness like 30 or 40 years ago maybe. And people, I think they don't know what it is. They don't know why they might want it or need it. There's all of this kind of kerfluffle around, getting paid to do the role versus it being a volunteer role. And you are an advocate for however this role comes to life. It's something that people need because of the things that you see in your work. And so I wanted to talk, I guess, a little bit about that, what you see in your practice around death anxiety and fear, and then also how you help guide folks through that. But let's start with the themes that you see and how people experience death anxiety and fear.
Ooh, that's a big question because it's so personal. So as a family therapist, I look at it's systemic. So when you do family therapy, it's a systemic therapy. So you're not an island. I don't think anyone's an island. We got to where we are with our death anxiety or any other things in our life from just a pattern that goes through your family system, your social system, and your own environment and own traumas, little t trauma or big T trauma, right? It just kind of adds up. And so when we're talking about death anxiety and death trauma in particular, we all have our own experience. And so it's just so individual. I know that I have some slides that I reference on my website that show just the fears in America and the studies that are done each year by Chapman University. And it just shows that over 50% of Americans say that death anxiety is one of their top fears. And the other fears on there are environmental and political. And I would even, and monetary, like they won't have enough money at the end of their life to take care of their bills. And I would even say all of those are in some way death anxiety and death fear. So, it's just hard. It's hard to put that in one space because I think everyone has some death anxiety, some death fears. And, I see that as a trend, but I don't know if I can put it in any kind of container for you, just because it's in every client that I have has some kind of death anxiety, whether it's kind of death avoidance because they have the fear and anxiety, or they want to talk about it because they have the fear and anxiety. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting in and of itself. The way that our culture, the US culture, approaches death solidifies it almost subconsciously in one way, which is that it is scary, that it is something to be pushed aside. And when you're not looking at something, you don't know what that thing is. Of course, there's going to be heightened anxiety around it. And I guess I wonder, is there something you see differently in older folks than younger folks, or does it just not matter because death is kind of the great equalizer?
it's kind of the great equalizer. Before I became a therapist, I was actually working with older adults in either senior centers or assisted living. And I would say in general, and when we look at studies, older adults have less death anxiety than younger folks. And it would just be me making assumptions on why that is exactly. But when I worked with folks, they just saw it enough. Like you live long enough and you have all these death teachers, and some of them are less traumatic and some of them are more traumatic, and you kind of get a little more comfortable with it is my guess, just from working with older adults and the stories as they're test, and their friends, and I was lucky enough to have some very close people to me that were over 100 years old, and
Oh,
you know yeah, and I one just was the most magnificent person, and she was 105 when I was around her, and like we would have these deep conversations about all this loss, and um, what it looked like. And so it's fascinating with age. You get more experience with death, and so maybe you're a little bit more comfortable. I
mm,
mean, yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. I think I came into that question thinking, um, perhaps as we become more, hang on one second, because the dog's coming in and the garage door is opening, and they'll edit this out.
Yep.
So, Julius, I'd like you to edit this piece out, please. Odie will come up in a minute and want to hug me, and then I will get back to this.
Oh,
Odie.
Odie is so cute.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. Okay, Julius, I'll carry on. I think I came into that question maybe with the assumption that as you become more familiar or closer to your mortality, perhaps that fear grows. But I love what you said, because it kind of, I don't want to say proves out or is evidence, because that's way too overstated, but that some proximity to death in life might just help us as we get closer to our own deaths.
Yeah. There's one other piece that I use quite a bit in my therapy practice, which is the idea of generativity, and that is the life stage that we get to, as you retire, as you are done working, you've had your kids are grown. Generativity is the phase of older age, I would say, where you're meant to give back. So you've learned all these lessons and ideas that you're giving back to the world, either through service or knowledge, right? And I think that piece isn't spoken of enough,
Oh no.
right?
Yeah.
And it's valuable, but it's also that we did what we came here to do anyway. And so again, it's just hypotheses on if that's actually the case. I don't know any like true studies on if that's true, but we can look at some biology pieces too, right? If you come here, you did what you're supposed to do. If there's some mental benefit to that piece, yeah, that's my 2 cents of hypothesis for today.
Yeah,
But
I learned a new word and a whole definition that I didn't know existed. So that's amazing.
yeah.
Well, where I thought we might go next is to maybe piss some people off.
Yes.
I knew you'd be game.
Let's do it.
And talk a little bit about the death industry and the death consciousness, death positivity and stuff right now, because I think we've talked a little bit about some communications that go on out there that might not be the most beneficial to people around death, that might be harmful. And I wanted to talk about those. And maybe the one we could start with is what I like to call, or you might have coined this, I'm not sure. I think we talked about it before, death metal, which is like when you're just shoving death in people's faces, whether it's an Instagram account where you're like, look at death, look at death, look at death, as a means to make people comfortable with it. That's not going to work, because as humans, we are the only species that knows we're going to die, right? So we are automatically pre-programmed to not be comfortable with death. Mm-hmm. Over to you on that subject.
Funny, I did not come up with that. That's the first time I've heard it. So I love it. Yeah. But yes, the people in this industry, and I think most of them are coming from a good space. The ones that are like, I want to talk about death all the time. But let's just go back. Everyone needs to check out that Chapman University slide, right? You can go over to my website because I have links to it. And notice that 50% plus of America has death anxiety, right? You know what they don't want? You know, when you're anxious, like you don't want to talk about that. So I'm just going to guess that that's not what you do, right? And so we, as therapists, talk about planting seeds. You know, we plant seeds along the way, and we make death adjacent products. We make death adjacent comments. We talk about things that are death adjacent before we are like, blah, you need to deal with this immediately, because it just isn't safe for a lot of people. And it could add more trauma if they have some major death traumas. And so in my practice as a therapist, I work with extremely traumatic death. And, you know, I think of those folks that I've cared for over the years of doing this work. I think about them walking through their life and coming across death doulas that are like, let's talk about death. It's really important. Personally, just really hold them close. And I think those folks are just, some of them aren't, some are like really, you know, like they've been touched by death in very traumatic ways, and they're ready to talk about it all the time. But some are not, right? Because it brings up all of that past trauma, and more people than you want to believe, right? More people than I want to have very traumatic deaths in their past. And so I just think of those people just walking through the streets and being like taken aback by that. Or on Instagram and not, you know, not asking for it. And when we're on social media, which has its own thing, it's called thanatosensitivity, for being on social media and seeing death all the time. So
yeah,
did that answer your question on death metal?
Yeah, it did. I even experienced that myself, because my feed is filled with death because I have programmed it to be so. And sometimes when I'm scrolling through my Instagram, I'm like, okay, enough with the death already. But I'm in that industry. And so are you. And so, yeah.
You're in too deep. Me too. Yeah. I try to mix it up. Now, and teach my feed to not be 100% on that level, just for that reason. You know, I got too far in for a little while, and then I was like, it's too much. But can we switch over to the happy part of it as well?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm really two-sided on that as well. You can't win if you're listening to me and you're in the death industry. You can't win, because I also don't love the happy washing of this, which is something that I coined a while back on what it is to be death positive and death, you know, celebrations of life and all these. You know, don't get me wrong, they all have their place, and I appreciate it. And I think that it again comes from the really great spot. But as someone that works with the grieving, they need the space to grieve. It doesn't have to be positive. It's actually both things. It's terrible and it's meaningful and healing, right? And it's just more complicated than either happy or all awful. So I don't know if that will piss people off, but
probably,
maybe.
but I mean, oh well.
Oh.
I saw a new word today that you might know, and I have forgotten it now, but it was on the lines of toxic positivity. It was a term like for toxic positivity and the effects that has, which is kind of what you're talking about here with happy washing. And I think the big takeaway for me, especially as a doula or somebody who's close to the dying and their community, family, people that are around them, is listen more than talk, right? Read the room, figure out what it is that that is
read
happening.
Read the room.
Which is way different than, you know, that's a personal, intimate situation where where I know that's what I'm walking into. It's not an Instagram feed, but also read the room of your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess
And
this is, go ahead.
And just one other space is like the term would be like holding the space, right?
Yes.
Hold the space for people to feel both things. And I think that's the gift that we have to offer, is that, vulnerability to be able to sit with people. If you're drawn to being in death work, but you have to have both. You can't just make it happy. You can't come into death work and be like, I'm going to make it all good, because I'm with the grieving and they do not think it's good. They're, not one of them is like, that was awesome. They're all really sad, right? And we laugh.
Sure.
In our sessions, I was blessed enough to do grief groups, and we would get in trouble for laughing so much sometimes. So that was really funny from the office people. They're like, "What are you all laughing about?" And I was like, "It was them. I don't know. I didn't do it."
But I think that's really important, is the duality piece of it, because it can be both, and it is often both at the same time. And recognizing that that's okay, and there's space enough for all of it in any of its intensity is really something important to keep in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And this would be a good time to transition, because we just talked about both of these things, to dead funny, dead serious. So
what?
Why don't you share a little bit about your podcast and your work through the podcast, because it is really transformative in its own right.
Why, thank you for that segue. I have some social media work that's called Dead Funny, Dead Serious. And we've been doing podcasts for a couple years now, and, poorly. And that is what that is.
You're really selling it. Really selling it.
Yeah, I know, right? Here, time out for one moment.
Okay, Julius.
Yes. Micah, do you have headphones? I'm picking up. Julius. I'm also listening. Yeah.
Editor.
Thank you. Awesome.
Back on, Julius.
Back on. I like Julius. Hi, Julius.
Yeah, hey.
Are you taking new clients? I don't know.
He is.
Yes. We'll talk. Okay, back on. So we were doing our podcast poorly. And that is what it is, as you're trying to get your sea legs there in the podcast world and social media, which I've just not naturally been fond of, I'll say. I mean, I love it. It was just like, where do I fit in this, right? Talking about grief and death and dying. And, it was just kind of hard to be in that space. So we started a couple series that I'm excited are starting now, which is 30 end-of-life doulas in 30 days. And, the idea was to talk to the breadth and width of all the doulas. And I was trying to pick all these people from across the world, really, that, the people that created certificate programs and the people that created programs and have been doing this as hospice workers for 30 plus years. And then the newest new, I have a couple people that just trained, have never sat bedside, they just trained. And I have one person that has not even taken the training yet. They just really want to be a death doula.
Oh, wow.
And then a bunch of, right? Like all of them. And then in between, I have some people that have, been doing the work for a year, 5 years. And so it was really to make sure that people can understand. I want people to be able to listen to this series and get a real grasp on where they came from, why people are doing this, right? How they got there, if they did training or, just life experience for some people. And, the challenges of, there's a lot of challenges and they're all different. I thought they were all going to be the same thing, right? When we come back to, oh, I know, my assumptions there. I was like, I'm going to understand it. And now I'm like, I don't know what's happening.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. and the hopes for the field. So yeah, that's what that series is. And there's a couple more coming after that. There's going to be some Thanatologist reacts videos just because we think we're funny. And I hope it is. And also end of life professionals, 30 end of life professionals will be coming up here soon. So.
Oh, I look forward to all of that. Knowing you and how expertly you navigate these conversations, and also how funny you are about the most serious of topics. It's going to be highly entertaining and everyone should listen. So listen.
Awesome. Yeah. And there's a great episode with Kristen Elliott. So I'm just going to say.
Right. Forgot. Look at that.
Forgot. Yeah.
The other thing that I really love that you're working on that's a little bit of a slow burn for you, but I know a really big passion is develop. Can I talk about this?
Sure.
Is the development of of shrouds, burial shrouds. And so maybe for anyone that's not up to speed, maybe you could talk a little bit about what those are, why they're important to you, and why you are developing your version of that.
So this project has been it's a slow burn project, mostly because it's really close to my heart. And I have been working with some designers, and we're putting together these burial shrouds. And so a burial shroud is fabric. So you're buried in fabric versus a casket. You can actually have a burial shroud and a casket if you're so inclined. But it's really the reason that it started getting to me is, one, caskets are part of a traditional funeral. And then when you start diving into thanatology, you start understanding where it came from. And I mean, it goes back to body snatchers. It goes way back on why we have these, and it doesn't actually correlate to today. It's part of a tradition, but I was like, is this the healthiest psychological tradition? And removing death from the family system might not psychologically be the best fit. And so I was like, how do we make it beautiful and safe and bring it back to the family system if they're ready for it? It's not for everybody. But kind of blending that natural tradition, environmentalism, but really, I mean, coming from my side, it's really about reducing the death traumas and the psychological impacts of removing death from family systems.
So what you're really talking about then is the idea of taking care of our dead at home, home funeral versus funeral home, which has its own origins. And I could go on for 6 hours about the perils of that, or not. I think there's a huge, by the way, total tangent. I think that there is a huge shift coming in traditional funeral home operation as as perhaps an older generation is no longer and a newer generation takes over and finds different ways of being. But that return to death in the family system and taking care of folks at home funeral, and shrouding as a piece of that instead of coffin, or I guess is something near to my heart as well. So I know you're in the process of developing that and making sure that you get it just right. And I'm really looking forward to that coming to life, for my own personal reasons and doula group and things like that. And that's one thing I'm passionate about too, is just returning some of that good care for our dying to the home and the family.
Yeah. And I appreciate your support on that project, because it's definitely a labor of love. I thought that was going to be a lot easier. I was formerly, before I was a therapist, I was a fine artist for many moons. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be this easy project, but it's, mixing a functional piece with art is, it's been a challenge, but I also just know my drive behind it is, hopefully with that big shift, and working with funeral homes and families and starting that shift, to be the most logical progression for getting to be more environmentally sound and psychologically sound when it comes to death.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I shared this on the podcast before, but our 20-year-old, I think I told you this too, as it was happening maybe, but our 20-year-old cat died last year, and my 12-year-old was a full part of the process, and we were able to have the time to decorate a shroud with vegetable dye paint, and I think it was incredibly healing for her, and then she took the lead in the burial piece and wrapping the cat. And it's amazing when you can be hands-on with touch, how healing that process is. So, that was with a beloved family pet. I can't imagine how transformative that would be with a human.
Yeah.
So go, Mitzi, go.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We haven't used any of our models yet for my family or anyone else. I will say I touched over a little bit, and I'll give a shout out to Paul at Arkwood Caskets in Oregon. He ships the pine box caskets, like it's a kit, right? And so you put it together. And for my stepfather in Chicago, we had one sent out, and Paul can get it to you in 24 hours. It's amazing. And we put it together and decorated it, and people all at the funeral, it was a traditional funeral, but we used this pine casket, which the funeral director tried to talk us out of because he said it wouldn't fit. And then I said, "You're wrong. I'm a thanatologist." And he was like, "What's that?" And I thought that was funny. And that's part of my sense of humor too. Full circle there. But everyone signed the top of the casket. And they wrote all these notes. And it was the most moving moment when all the siblings, like we all stood around it and read what everyone had written before we buried him. And it was like that. That's what we want to bring back for the shroud, right? We want to bring back however it looks. If you want a pine box, if you want a shroud, bringing the family together to have those moments. So,
yeah. And the ritual and the ceremony that those instruments help empower for us and give us a vehicle to have those through, which is something that's largely been scripted through the use of funeral homes and things. But there are, as many different ways to celebrate someone who has died, or maybe I just happy washed that, to honor someone that has died, as there are ideas for how to do so. So it doesn't have to be one way, is I guess what I'm saying. And the more tools and vehicles that we have to make that happen, then the more empowered people can be to make the right choice for themselves. And I think that's what this is really about. Helping people understand that they have a choice. They have a choice for how to go through their dying process. They have a choice for how to be supported in that. And then they have a choice for their after death process and care as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, there's just so many new technologies that are happening too. So yeah, it's amazing.
Did you see that Recompose got approved in Colorado today?
No, what?
Yeah. So everybody needs to look up Recompose Life and to check that out, because it is one of the new technologies that is emerging for how you can be cared for, how body disposition. And it's really interesting.
Amazing. No, I haven't hopped on Instagram today, but I will say yesterday I was on Instagram and Recompose Life followed me. So let's just drop that right there.
I'm a little jealous. That's amazing. I'm going to go comment on all their posts so that they feel like they have to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I wasn't following them, so I'm following them because I don't know why I wasn't. So yeah, it all comes full circle. We all work together. It's really an important part of this whole thing, is that all of us that want that shift, continue to educate and inspire and, make it as engaged as possible without being scary. So when people are ready, right. No metal though, just love. when they're ready, they know that they can talk to us about it, and that we all work together, and it's a team effort to make this, less traumatic,
Uh,
hopefully.
that was epically said. I think that's a great place to end today. But I do want to make sure that you are able to tell people where to find you. So Dead Funny, Dead Serious, all written out,
Yes.
or DFDS on Instagram?
Nope, all written out. We don't want to hide that at all, ever, right? Dead Funny Dead Serious on Instagram, Facebook, deadfunnydeadserious.com. You can find the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify. We're just everywhere. I just love that. Yeah, follow us there at TikTok. There's some really terrible videos on there, but if anyone wants to follow me, that would be awesome, and I'll make more terrible videos then. Right?
I did
That's
not know
what we're
you were on
doing.
TikTok. That's what I'm doing now after we get off.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, you're gonna see in Clubhouse. You can find me at Mitzi W on Clubhouse, which is amazing to have conversations just one-on-one, because you can just be in the room with the people that are making these decisions and doing this work. And I think that what's better than asking just directly. I learned something yesterday about medical aid in dying, because I had a direct question and I just went to the people. I
Yeah.
asked directly. So cool.
So it's just a at the ready, ask an expert. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, you could just get them right there. Like, they pop up every couple of days, and you just get to ask them directly what they were thinking. No, it wasn't like that. What were you-
Did they after they answered you, did they say, but what is a thanatologist?
Yeah, they were like, no, these people know. These are the real deals. They all know. And I've interviewed a lot of them, so I just wanted to ask a question, but it was nice to get them all on one panel, and to be able to have that conversation like that. So you're on Clubhouse. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this chat. I'm sure we will have many more, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. It was my absolute pleasure.